I'm going to talk about some of the things that we can do in our day-to-day lives, at work, some of the tweaks we can do in the way that we approach as individuals and as teams, so that we can kind of get into the flow and work with more kind of agility. So I'll start this with a little story. So I worked at these two places. When I was at Bacardi, I was in the global branding team, the digital team. We were actually quite small. There was only 7 people in the digital part of Bacardi Global. We had some really bright people, we had loads of cash, but we never could get anything done. And all I ever wanted was more manpower, or woman power, or people power, to go out there and solve great big things. And then I went to work at BBC News, where we had 30 developers and 30 designers and 10 people on the product team. And guess what? We didn't get anything done because everything was really complex and really stuck in the mud. And I thought, wow, okay, so it's not just more people that we need. What is it? And I was really fortunate because when I was at the BBC, we did an agile transformation. We were trying to rebuild the whole of the BBC News website from tables-based HTML, for the nerds out there, to responsive, which for a company that publishes, millions of articles in its history, tens of thousands anyway, it was a big feat. And literally within days, and I do mean days, of bringing in specialist coaches at ThoughtWorks, everything was unlocked and people were moving. We all split into our small work streams, and work started to get delivered, and it was really, really awesome. And for me, that was kind of a real eye-opening moment in terms of what working in different ways can do. But where we kind of ended up after that is, 10 years later, I think it's become obvious that Agile, whilst it solves a lot of problems, comes with its own set of problems. Especially in organizations that aren't tech-focused, people can't wait an unlimited amount of time to be delivered something that they don't know how much it's going to cost and they don't know what they're going to get. Like, that just doesn't fly. So when everyone was obsessed with Agile as a methodology, I think what has transpired, and even some of the founders that wrote the principles for Agile have come out and said this, it's about agility, it's having an Agile mindset, not necessarily sticking to the process. So I think this is also really complicated in our world, because most of us here probably would have classed as knowledge workers. We don't actually produce anything of tangible in terms of physical. We handle vast amounts of information, and then we try and make good sense of it and then make recommendations out the back of it. And it's that piece there in terms of we need to find the best data that we can possibly get. We then need to be as efficient as possible at processing all of that data. And then we need to make some conclusions and, really importantly, communicate that with all the people that we're going to be working with, or our customers, or whoever that's going to be. And that's where the challenge really comes for us. So that's kind of got me thinking, okay, so we've got to be agile. We're working with, all of these techniques to try and move us forward. So really what we're talking about here is getting ourselves individually and our teams into a state of flow where we can produce the best possible work at all times. And we do have a lot of pressure on us in all of our jobs to do have to perform at the highest possible standards in an ongoing way. And that requires us getting into be able to consistently do that, to be in this kind of state of flow. And that's really, really tough, because being in flow is quite a rare thing. I mean, when they talk about flow, it's more kind of what maybe like artists or musicians might experience when they're, creating great works of art. But really, we should be striving for the same types of experiences in our own day-to-day lives when we're doing work. And this requires us to really become masters of our own kind of like world. I'm a massive fan of this podcast, Finding Mastery, by Michael Gervais. He interviews big wave surfers, Fortune 100 CEOs, and Olympic swimmers to find out, what is that. He's a performance psychologist. What is it that unites these people? Often it's experiences in their childhood, all that kind of stuff. And I've heard all the stories about people that work 90 hours a week, and those that are completely genetically gifted and born with these rare talents that the rest of us, are kind of like we're left out at birth. But really, kind of what it comes down to when I listen to all of these, and what I take a lot of inspiration from, is that a lot of it comes down to your work ethic. how much and hard you're willing to work at something. Your kind of self-belief in terms of believing what you're trying to do and what your organisation or your team's trying to do is worth it, and having very clear, articulated goals of where you're trying to get to. And when those three things come together over a period of time, that's what kind of mastery is. And those three things apply to all of us, not just kind of Olympic athletes, luckily. So I've got three ways in which we can kind of tweak the way that we work, in terms of organising ourselves in an intentional way, visualising the work that we do, and doing deliberate practice in what we do on an everyday basis. And I'll kind of dive into these a little bit deeper now. So organising with intent is really, really important. How you kind of structure your day and your desk, not my desk, don't look at my desk, and your team and your working environment is going to have a direct implication on the outcomes, and it's going to affect how you get things done. Especially in these kind of team environments where we're under a lot of pressure and we're kind of doing these kind of weird, like, thought experiments of trying to come up with what might we statements to kind of, change the world. So I'm glad you talked about how might we, because I have the exact same way when I think about how we try to change the way we tackle problems, and having this experimental mindset. I think every project, every campaign, every program of work should start out as a hypothesis. And I like the how might we, not just because it's positive, but also because it's expansive. It allows kind of all ideas to be open and to come in through that front door. But really importantly, when I think if you're tweaking to an experimentation mindset, which a lot of teams do, you come in and you get people to come in, in my world it's usability testing to validate what you've done. Unfortunately, if the hypothesis is not there to be proven, the hypothesis is there to be tested. And as Jessica mentioned, if you get to the end of the week and it doesn't work, you don't carry on. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, we've gone too far down the track in some of these projects and programs of work. There's too much invested, there's a sunk cost fallacy, and people want to crack on. So we need to start with our experimentation mindset of, we could be disproven at any point, and we need to be able to adjust. Cross-disciplinary teams, balancing that with kind of our individual focus is also incredibly important. We're lucky here in Cohesive we can bring together the tech, the design and the UX and the strategy all together to solve problems. We've got a big project going on at the moment. We've got a war room. We can get everyone in there and kind of like really tackle it head on. It's really, really important, and it very rarely happens in some of the corporates that I've seen. I know that there is a shift to it, especially those that work in IT and tech and digital, but I think marketing is a huge opportunity as well to do this. Like I said, I saw it at the BBC when everything kind of got unlocked, when database administrators were sitting with developers and designers and kind of trying to work these things out in real time, and it really was amazing to see. And when you can combine some of that kind of like cross-pollination thinking with your own individual time to go and do kind of like that flow state stuff and really focus on, the bit that you need to focus on, then it's really, really empowering. A huge thing that we have started to really, really push ourselves and our clients to do is visualizing your work, is getting it out there, metaphorically on the wall, but getting it out there as early as possible to be kind of like knocked around and seen from different perspectives and put back together again. And it's not until you can clearly articulate something that you really understand it, and until you can really understand it and articulate it to someone else and have them also experience it, that's when you know that you've really got, you're onto that correct, right idea. So kind of what I kind of suggest is get all your IKEA art down off the walls, move the desks away, and use your most valuable office real estate, which is the wall. And I'm going to go through some examples of how we do that at the moment. Here's one from earlier today, just some simple Postits, obviously. I think what people forget with Postits is Postits aren't just about sticking them on the wall. Postits are about actually moving them around afterwards. That's why they're sticky and re-sticky. And this was just, a whole bunch of things that were in a long list to start with. And we actually spent half an hour structuring these things around. I know it sounds silly, but it's actually really important, because if we didn't set this program of work up correctly in the first place, it could have completely set us off on the wrong track in terms of how we were going to be talking about it, organising our teams, reporting on things, and just how we were going to deliver the work overall. So just half an hour spent on a wall like that was actually really powerful. The next piece, and if anyone wants this template, I'm more than willing to share it with you. We've got PDF versions of it that you can print out. It's called Project Walls. Project Walls are really, really great for senior stakeholders. Basically, every single organisation has a load of stuff going on inside it, and it's really hard to get a single view of actually what's happening. You have program teams that might be responsible for one workflow. You might have the marketing team that knows their little universe, but actually getting a single consolidated view in a language that senior people can talk about in terms of size, value, the cost to kind of set up and the ongoing kind of costs, and what sort of delivery horizon it is, and then have a really detailed conversation about these and have one for each program of work. It's really, really, it's amazing to do. And Quentin and I went out to Dubai, and although he'll not be very happy about the wonky line across the top, that's because I stuck them up there. This was 3 days worth of work. And we went through and we wrote down a card for every single every single program of work, every single project that had to happen. And on the left over there, we had our principles. Principles for us are like a filter. So when you're making a decision, you can bounce an idea off of it, and if it bounces back, you probably need to reevaluate what you're doing. And what I mean by that is, if you had we have to have a single view of the customer. And by having this card here further to the left, it meant we were developing two separate databases or views of the customer. That doesn't fly, so it allows us to have those that reorganisation. We spent about 3 days with the CMO and I think PricewaterhouseCoopers in the room at some point, talking about this investment over 3 years. It's all quite high level. But then we're also allowed to enable Quentin to go back 2 weeks later and put the same thing back up on the wall and talk to the CEO in his language and get this kind of piece of work signed off. So Project Walls, if anyone wants to talk about it more, happy to talk about that afterwards. Critique is a huge thing within a team. If you're going to put your stuff up on the wall, you need to learn to both be open to feedback, but also be able to give good feedback. And this is a skill that you have to practice on a regular basis, because if you get it wrong, you either don't give your ideas, you shoot it down, you say it's rubbish, you walk out of the meeting afterwards and gossip between each other that was a terrible idea. We've all seen it, but I've got some steps that you can do in terms of implementing how to give critique on work that you put up on the walls. So if you're asking for feedback, you've got to kind of give some context as to, this is where our thinking is at this point of time. It might be rough, it might be a day's worth of work, but hang on, I'm going to put it out there. You need to build some empathy with who you're making it for. We're often designing products for users that we don't know anything about, but we'll have some empathy maps and talk that through the people that you're giving the opportunity for critique from. And don't be forced into getting defensive and justifying your decisions too early. Just put it out there and kind of take a step back and allow people to prod it and poke it. And then if you are going to give feedback, ask questions, don't suggest solutions. There's nothing worse than saying, we could just put the button over there, or we could just do this. Ask questions, frame it in a more expansive way, so that we have a conversation and we're not just nodding along. And also make sure that you're encouraging and teaching people to use non-emotional and non-judgmental language, because that's really important in terms of group dynamics and keeping things open. Here's an example here of Jamie. He was talking us through a transaction process, just sketching it out. And by him talking it through, he kind of realized actually that, we're actually going down a bit of a rabbit hole. And, just by kind of articulating it, getting it up there and allowing us to kind of question through, even at a very, very low fidelity, like up there, we were able to make some quick decisions really easily. Then we had our team kind of dive a bit deeper and have some quiet time, go and stand in front of these screens and write on Post-it notes questions, trying to unpick things so that we can make sure that we've got the right evaluation. It's really important to do that on your own and have enough time. I think we had 10-15 minutes to do this, really kind of have a look at the language, because we've all seen it where designs have language that was just shoved in by a designer at the time just because they didn't have any copy, and it ends up on the final thing. Stuff like that's actually really important. So having fresh eyes looking at it at all times, even when it's in low fidelity, can be really useful. And then the final area that I'm going to talk about is around deliberate practice. And I think this is something that the sports world's got absolutely nailed, but we probably don't have it quite so well down in our world. We're not elite athletes, so we don't need to worry. But there are things that we should be doing on a daily or weekly basis. I mean, this is a World Cup winning elite athlete from the All Blacks, Sonny Bill Williams. He's practicing his passing and tackling every day. This is stuff that he learned when he was 12 years old, but he's still doing it every day on the training field. And what is it that we should be doing every day to make sure that we're sharp? That's something that I kind of try and ask myself every so often. And one of the things I'm really passionate about is trying to elevate the discourse that my team is able to have. And what I mean by that is there are different levels of conversations that you can have. We've all seen it. You can be talked at like I'm doing now. Then you can kind of like talk to, where I understand a little bit more about your context and I might personalize this speech a bit more. But then you start getting into speaking with and then listening and empowering. And really taking people on teams and groups on a journey of having more constructive conversations is really critical. It goes back to that critique slide I had earlier. And we did little things like we introduced something called Theme of the Week, which allowed us to take a topic. And I wanted to do this because I found that we were just talking at each other and we weren't actually conversing. And I felt, well, if this is happening within our team, what's it like with our clients, and what does that look like from the outside? So we had these kind of discussions purposely designed to actually encourage that ability to have an open conversation, admit you don't know about something and all that kind of stuff, and kind of break down some of those barriers. And I think a lot of teams, especially with some of the bigger corporates that I've worked with and my clients, they could do with this, because there's a lot of ego in rooms and kind of like, this is how we do it, and hierarchy. And I actually think that if you practice how to communicate with each other better, then we can all have much more constructive meetings. And then finally on meetings are for working. Meetings aren't for meeting and arranging the next meeting. And what I mean by this is I think that it's about the conversations, it's about making decisions. It's great if we can do a 5-day Google Venture Spree, but what can we do in an hour that's actually a really great use of everybody's time, not running for a status report and then going away and me doing my bit of work and someone else doing their little bit of work and then coming back together and us not being aligned and not being agreed because I've got assumptions and you've got assumptions. If you can do this stuff in the hours and hours of meetings that we all spend in every week, think how much better the output of all of our kind of individuals and kind of like team efforts could be. And so 3 things to try and remember. The last one's the most important, by the way, working in meetings. That's the one that you had to remember if you remember nothing else. Organising with intent, be purposeful, take a step back, think about how we can all be individually and better as teams. Work out how you can visualise your work. I'm lucky we work with screens, it's easy to, but there's ways of doing it, whether it's with project walls or with campaign landing pages, whatever it would be. There's definitely ways that you can do it. And think about what you should be deliberately practicing as individuals and as teams to get better so that we can all have a more kind of frictionless work environment. Leaving with a little bit of inspiration. I mean, I do think that if we're not careful by the end of when you go and hand in your notice, you feel like the victim because all the things that you could have done were never kind of brought to fruition. I do believe that we are kind of like the architects, and we have a responsibility individually for our future, and we can all kind of work better to not be the victim.